Okay, sure. Can you hear me? Okay. So, any students online? Right. So we'll give it like another 5 to 7 minutes, see if someone else is coming, and then we can begin with some of the basics and get to your questions after that. All right. I think we can begin and people can join in as such. So, what this session was supposed to do was supposed to serve as a doubt clarification session where you guys can ask me. I'm the course TA, I'm Swati Ganeshan, and you guys can ask me any questions you have logistic wise or generally regarding assignment questions or about the course material in general. So what I'll do is I'll run you through the different set of lectures that are part of this course and what your expected takeaways are from each of the lectures and what you're expected to do in the course on the whole. So let's just start with that. So the first lecture, it's titled Ethics, What, Why, and Why Not, is basically supposed to highlight the different schools of thought that have come to be associated with the field of ethics. Like there are different philosophers who have different takes on what ethics should be and what is part of it. Like for example, this lecture takes you through various philosophers like Aristotle, Plato, and Aquinas, and Bentham, and all of these people. So they all have different views of what counts as ethical and what does not. And there is always, obviously, the very inevitable intersection with what is moral and what is legal and how they can be differentiated. So for me, what I took away from this was that the key difference between ethics, morality, and law is such that ethics has more to do with what you ought to do and what you should do, and it is largely circumstantial. So you're supposed to evaluate your surroundings and who is the people involved and your own position and then make an ethical decision. Morality can be something that you that that is imbibed in you because you're part of a certain community or a culture or a family, or it can be inherited in many ways, and it's almost always unconscious, with rare exceptions, of course. So morality is something that's unconscious, and law is something that is supposed to be a basic enforceable set of rules so that there is a bare minimum understanding of what counts as acceptable and what does not, and its basis lies in the concept of equality. So the law is equal in everyone's for everyone. So those are the three key differences. And what follows is different understandings of what counts as ethics. So what this lecture is supposed to do is essentially give you insights into what different kind of discussions have been there within the field of ethics before jumping into something as specific as tech ethics. So yeah, this lecture takes you through concepts of free will and utilitarianism and normative ethics, what counts as moral and who has discussed different variations of that, what is justice, where does that come from. So different kinds of that. So if you go through the lecture, you should get a very insightful overview of what kind of discussions of around ethics have taken place in the past. Now, the next lecture is more to do, it gets more towards the pointy end of technology and ethics. So we're getting closer to that. So what this does is draws on what all has been discussed in relation to technology and ethics, because technology, needless to say, has been a very, very important development that has several ethical dilemmas surrounding it, and constantly, because technology is in a constant state of flux and it's constantly evolving. So, what are the different kinds of ways that people have spoken about it, and what are the different ways that one can begin to think about technology and ethics, and what are the boundaries that one can look at in terms of an ethical framework? So, this lecture titled Technology and Ethics, which is the second lecture in the series, is supposed to give you an insight into that brief history. So, this talks about the fetish of technology, the paradoxes of technology, and ethics in everyday acts like moral facts, human agency and ethics, relational ethics, morality and politics. So if you go through these this particular lecture should give you an overview of how technology and ethics, where are they intersecting, and how can we begin to have a conversation about tech and ethics together. So, after having done that, you should arrive at a point where you look at different schools of thought about how technology is viewed. One is the very prominent and prominent view of technological determinism, which is that technology has inherent features which dictates a certain outcome. Substantivism is that technologies shape society. Voluntarism is humans develop technology at their own free will. And instrumentalism is that technological artifacts are neutral tools and they are merely used by humans. So, at this point, by the time you get through this lecture, you should get an overview of these four prominent views revolving around tech and ethics, and you should be able to at least attempt to see these things in everyday life and how and be able to make out which view fits which situation. So that is the expectation at this point. And then that's when we begin thinking about which way to go about an ethical framework for technology. So, yeah, at the end of this, you should be perplexed and try to have a conversation about ethics and technology and whether or not the two can coexist. So, that kind of existential thought is completely expected at this point. So after that, we get more specific when we come to the third lecture in the series, which is a centralized technology and localized services, a case for selective inclusion. And this particular thing talks specifically about India and specifically about PDS and other government schemes. So this takes you through the different cases in which Aadhaar linking with PDS highlights at various levels. I'm sorry, just give me. Right. So, sorry about that. This takes you through the Aadhaar linking and the PDS and how that has played out in the implementation process. So, this specifically talks about the ground reality of it. And then abstracting from that ground reality is what we arrive at is how do we begin to think about tech design being implemented in the everyday, and then how do we begin thinking about an ethical framework around that. So by this point, you would see how technology plays out in the everyday at the grassroots level, on the ground level, and how you can kind of draw from the first two lectures of discussions around ethics and technology and see what applies and what are the different dilemmas you face as you go through this lecture. So this is a specific case of Aadhaar linking with PDS and the ground realities of that. Now, after having done that, you come to the fourth lecture, which is smart cities and equity. Now, smart cities and equity, the overview that it's supposed to give you is that how is a city made? How is designing a city and its connection to technology? How does that affect those living in it? How does that affect our notion of cities? So this is also another case, but in a slightly broader sense. So this is supposed to give you an overview of when we say smart cities, when we associate technology with development in cities, how do we go about thinking it, and how is it being thought of right now? So this gives you an overview of that. So this is also a very specific case, which is related to cities and geography and space. So this gives you an insight into thinking about technology in relation to space and design, and how what kind of impacts can that have on various things. Now, as we move forward, it becomes more and more about data and development. Those two, um, you know, the coexistence of those two, data and development. So that's where we become more and more specific with the tech and the ethics part. So the next lecture, which is titled Data or an Anti-Politics Machine, is supposed to give you an overview of what kind of how do we interpret data, can that have, and what on do we do with this interpretation of data when it comes to using that for real life purposes. Like this lecture takes you through examples of facial recognition software and money lending programs, which use data collected from various fields and various at various points in time, and how that helps shape decisions that are detrimental to someone's life or a society at large. So thinking about data and AI in governance, and this is where you begin to do that. So at this point, you're trying to use these cases that you've studied with the PDS and the smart cities, plus your general discussions of ethics, put them together and try and visualize how data in those settings can have an impact on your life personally. So this takes you to various examples. It talks extensively about the beginning of the state identifying its citizens through biometrics, and it tries to touch upon where all politics comes into the picture when we talk about data. So this is where you begin to think about data, ethics, technology in synchronization with governance. So at this point, this is the expectation of the takeaway from till here. Going forward, it gets a little more specific even with data. So, data, democracy, and justice, the next lecture in the series, talks extensively about the MGNREGA program and what are the anomalies and what are the cases where its failure is fairly apparent, and what can you say about the government's use of data that it documents or records while providing employment or while enforcing the MGNREGA Act. And what does that mean for rights based legislature at large? And what does that mean for democracy? So, what you're expected to do at this point is try to see what are the different things that the speaker presents from their research and draw from it and see if you can ask questions about what this means for democracy, and how can we begin to think about technology in a democratic setting, and what are the different ways in which it is currently being enacted, and what are the different ways in which there can be changes. So at this point, this is the expectation from this lecture. And the last two subject lectures talk exclusively about AI. Now, the first one is AI and ethics, governance, and policy, all terms that you've discussed before in different contexts, coming together against the backdrop of AI. So, what does AI really mean? Does it mean that governance is going to get much harder, regulation is going to get much harder? How do we begin thinking about something that seems so abstract right now? What does AI mean for human jobs and automation? And how does one begin to think about legal reinforcement and all of that? So, this particular um, lecture titled AI and Ethics, Governance, and Policy outlines the kind of questions that one can ask or one is expected to be prepared to ask when AI becomes a complete reality. It is in the process of becoming a reality, and as and when it does, these are the questions that one must continue to ask so as to establish an ethical, moral, and legal framework around something that still remains abstract to a certain extent, which is AI. So, this should give you an overview of how it's being thought out in various ways and how can it be thought of in terms of standards, in terms of policy, in terms of regulation. So that's again connecting ethics to a framework, policy framework, and see how that can coexist. AI, technology, and ethics. So this is where you begin thinking exclusively in the use case of AI. Now, the last subject lecture, which is a materialist conception of AI and ethics, is an extension of this, which just throws more light on how AI can be conceptualized through the lens of materialism and what are the different outcomes of such a conception. Um, like, does it become easier or tougher to enforce a legal framework in such a scenario? What are the implications in terms of for organizations, where and who will be accountable? What does it mean for transparency? So these are the different things that you will address um, by finding out if AI through a material lens fits in this entire thing or not. So that is something that you get to reflect on and that you get to ponder upon and see where that takes you in terms of AI in the future and what it means for human existence at large. Like, do our regulations become more stringent? Does privacy become a more pressing concern? These kind of questions definitely pop up. And this lecture is meant to get you to think about those things and ask questions about those things. So that's the rough overview. I think we took you through pretty much everything that I can think of that each lecture is supposed to get you to think about. These are the expected takeaways from each of the lectures and the series as a whole. Now, if you have any questions, then you can go ahead and ask me because this was supposed to be doubt clarification session. And from what I can understand, there are a few questions about assignments and the lectures on the whole. So I'll be here. You can ask me some questions. Yes, I see some highs and hellos in the chat box. Any questions? Harshkavish Kumar and Jagannath MS. Right. So Vidhi has a question about the pattern of the exam. So the final exam, that's what you're asking, I'm assuming. So the final exam will be an objective type question. And yeah, it's an objective type thing. It's not subjective. So there will be multiple choice answers where either one option will be correct or multiple options will be correct. So yeah, that's multiple choice. The question about the assignments or the course content, anything is welcome. I'll be right here. Right. Okay. So there is another question by Ahish B. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Do you think we need to constitute a digital ethics board that will act as a bridge between government, companies, and population? So, a lot of companies have ethics boards that are supposed to regulate the process through which the companies act or create certain any product or service. And yeah, am I audible? Yes, okay. So, again, so you take the ethics boards that the companies have, and then you take the legal framework that is already guaranteed by the Constitution. That should serve as enough of a framework for companies to be ethical, and um, governments are supposed to adhere to the Constitution and the legal framework. But the reality is such that the ethics boards are not, they almost always, if you watch the last lecture on AI and ethics, um, the speaker Anupam Goha highlights the realities of ethics boards who almost always find a way around things, and they're not so much concerned about how their product or service will affect the population, but they're more concerned about whether or not they're following the right process. So, this is the reality of an ethics board. So, on paper, ethics boards do exist that are supposed to that are supposed to lay down guidelines for the companies to follow. But the reality is such that they do very little to regulate the effect that a company's product or services can have on the general population. So, yeah, just indicate if that answers your question or ask me a follow up if you have any remaining doubts. All right. So Ashlesha Kulkarni has a question. Are there assignments and are they compulsory? If yes, then how many assignments are compulsory to complete? Unfortunately, Ashlesha, all the assignments are compulsory. They're supposed to test your overall understanding of the course. So each assignment is supposed to cumulatively involve the previous lectures also. So it's not just it's not such that assignment 1 focuses on lecture 1 and 2, 2 focuses on 3 and 4. So as you go forward, 1 focuses on 1 and 2, means assignment 2 will focus on whatever you've discussed thus far. So all the assignments are compulsory, in short, to answer your question. And there's another question again by Ahish. Okay. In the context of smart cities, there is talk of building knowledge graphs. Given the huge amount of data that will be generated, new questions arise. I'm just going to read the questions on mute. Right. So, are our current legal framework sufficiently robust to address these issues? That is the biggest question. That is what needs constant exploration and updation. Because as technological innovation progresses, as I mentioned, technology is in a constant state of flux, which means the legal framework that governs and the ethical framework that governs the technology that we use also needs to be constantly updated. So, as of now, I am not fully aware or I am not capable of answering whether or not our current legal framework is sufficiently robust enough to address all of the issues that we face today. But part of why an ethics board or a committee that or an external committee or some a committee that oversees exists is so that these frameworks can be constantly looked at and see if they answer such questions. So I don't think there is any absolute in you can say in any absolute sense that they are robust enough because they are also have to be constantly updated. But that is the point of talking about ethics in relation to tech, so that you can constantly evaluate if the frameworks that you adhere to and the rules that you abide by are sufficient enough to um, kind of guarantee that technology does not lead to um, catastrophe or misuse in any way. Is there any other question, or is there a specific case that you would like to discuss? Especially related to the Smart City initiative, there have been multiple researchers who have raised concerns about how differently you can continue thinking about smart cities. What are the real life challenges that are that present themselves? So for example, one of the biggest concerns is that the policy conception of smart cities is quite detached from the actual reality. So that being the case, it becomes slightly more difficult for you to think about a robust legal framework in that sense, right? Because if the way you're formulating policy is a little bit detached from the ground reality, then certain problems will present themselves much later for which you may not have a framework to address. So this gap needs to be bridged, and that is what these overseeing committees are expected to do. But again, reality is a little bit different. Not all overseeing committees follow their responsibilities, follow what they're expected to do. Vidhi, there is a okay. I'm going to continue reading on mute. Sorry. Excellent question. Yeah. So it's great that you're asking this question. Now, there is no simple yes or no question to this. So obviously, if you're the fact is that a lot of this paid labor is not only a lot of this unpaid labor is not only bad for the fact that it's unpaid, it's also invisible in a lot of cases. So you're not only providing your data, you're also doing it without having knowledge of it. So it's great that you're asking these questions, and that's all I can say at this point. I think you should figure the answer out by yourself, and by the end of the course, you should have a clearer picture. Um, yes, of course, unpaid labor is never okay, but yeah, data you produce as a consumer is something that's much bigger than unpaid labor. So keep asking those questions. That's all I can say at this point. Anything else? Vidhi? Any other question you have? There is also this conception of um, you know the consumer being the commodity, right? When something is free, the consumer is usually the commodity. So just think of it on those lines and see for yourself, like coming from an ethical point of view. Of course, unpaid labor is not fair, but what are the different dimensions that make it inevitable in today's scenario? So I would urge you to think in that direction. Vidhi and Aish, did I answer your question, or do you have any more follow ups that require some clarification? Now, I'm not being too descriptive with my answers because these questions, you yourself are expected to attempt to answer. These are pretty pointed questions that you will not, that I would not expect to get a yes or no answer to. But if you understand the complexity of what goes into thinking about tech and ethics, which you clearly have because you've started to ask these questions, that is a good starting point, I would say. But if any other questions persist, please do ask. Again, when you say should we be paid for that or not, think of scale and monitoring and data collection along those lines. How do you identify who is giving what? How do you identify the work being done? So, all of those standards are still being thought about. So, I would urge you to think on those lines when you think of unpaid and invisible labor. Right. Okay. So both Vidhi and Aish are looking for reference material. Now, for example, um, I just wanted to confirm: have the slides been made available to you? Just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the comment section, and then if they have been made available, at the end of each lecture, there are references attached. So if you go through those, they will give you a very comprehensive picture of what is being talked about. So not only do you have the lectures and the PPT, but you also have the references that the speakers draw from. And if you read those, then you get quite deep insight into the different kinds of things that have been spoken about in this particular intersection of tech and ethics. So, has have the lectures been made available? Have the PPTs? Because I was told that they have. So, if they have, then look for the last slide in each of them. They all have references listed. They all are quite extensive study material. But even after that, if you have also a good place to start looking for, you know, if you want a general overview of what's been spoken about, the discourse around ethics, then I would suggest this website. I'm just going to type that in the comment box. Just give me a second. Right. So you can look at this initiative by Stanford. This talks exclusively about philosophy, and of course, a huge section of this covers ethics in general. So you can take a look at different philosophers and different thinkers who have spoken about ethics and the larger discourse around this field. Otherwise, good old Google should help you. And in case you want any pointed material that you don't already get from the slides are quite self-sufficient. You can always, just drop me a message on the discussion forum. I will be more than happy to give you excerpts that might clarify any specific questions or concepts that you want. I hope that helps. Right. So, if no other questions are there, or if everyone is, you know, still, if everyone wants to ask questions, either way, I think we should be able to end this session in about another 10 minutes. So, I'll wait another 10 minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask on the chat box. And of course, reach out. You can reach out to me on the Discord if you want. Hi. There's a question. Right. I think we should give it like another 5 minutes to see if there is anything else. Yeah. Oh, is it? Okay, the link hasn't popped up. Yes, I am talking about the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. That gives you a very, I think, comprehensive introduction into the field of philosophy and ethics. So that's a good place to start. But if you're looking for something more pointed, then I can compile, a set of resources and just put it up on the discussion forum where you will be able to access it either by today or tomorrow. So, yeah. Okay, only 2 or 3 lectures provide the reference list. Right, okay, so why don't I do this? Let me compile a list for each lecture of useful resources. Again, there is some work that you will have to do by yourself, but these should, uh, you know, guide you through some core concepts and should get you started in some way. So I'll compile a lecture wise list and I will put it up on the discussion forum either by today evening or tomorrow afternoon. One of the two. Latest by tomorrow afternoon, you should have it up on the discussion forum. Does that work? So a lot of what's right. So Ayush has a question about technology and growth and how technology should permeate into industrial workspaces. So I'm going to talk specifically about AI because that's what's been dealt with in great detail in the last 2 lectures. So the fear is that human jobs will not audible. Am I audible now? Hello. Just somebody give me any indication of whether I'm audible or not. Okay, I think I am, so I'm just going to go ahead. Right. So the expectation was that automation would completely eliminate or replace to a large extent the need for human employment, which is not the case. The way in which AI is being incorporated into the industry today is such it's at a very gradual level that is still being understood. So what's happening is that AI is expected to take um, tasks that micro tasks. AI is expected to take up micro tasks that can be broken down to the smallest level, the most fundamental tasks, which require repetition and that kind of stuff. So that is our understanding of what AI is capable of right now. But the way it's been made out is that AI is going to take over the entire human workforce and leave nothing for humans, which is not going to be the case. The middle and high skill level, mostly high skill level jobs, which require a lot of thinking and conception, are still going to be um, requiring human, employees. But what will certainly be raised is the bar for someone to be employable. Like entry level jobs and middle level mid level jobs are going to be the ones that are going to be targeted. So that is our current understanding of what AI is capable of course, as you rightly pointed out, technology grows in spurts, and so its outcome cannot be fully realized until we're almost there. So one cannot foresee all the possible impacts that this kind of technology growth can bring about. But that is the point of this discussion, is that the ethics and technology in in should function in a symbiotic relationship where they're constantly evaluated with respect to each other. So it should not be like your ethical framework was something that was created in 2012, but your the way you're automating, the way you're introducing technology into your processes is still very much 2021. So that is the point. Even though you cannot completely expect the outcome, the point is to continuously keep evaluating whether or not the current framework is sufficient to encapsulate what technology is capable of at that point in time. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, so in short, I don't think there is any optimal rate at which technology is supposed to be incorporated or into industrial workspaces. So I can actually provide a couple of resources right here that talk about tech and labor together, and then maybe you can start thinking about those in relation to ethics. So let me just put up a few works in the chat box. I will also include them in the list so you can have it all at one place, but for now, I'll just put it up. So these couple of works is where they first started thinking about the degradation of work and the de-skilling of work. So that should give you an interesting, um, point of view about how people started thinking about work and technology and the incorporation of technology, which is very much um, close to what you're trying to ask. Of course, needless to say that these are not absolute truths about automation and work and labor and technology. These are merely the different ways in which people have started to think about these technology and labor in relation to each other. So, yeah, just keep that in mind while you're going through these works. And of course, try to connect this with technology and ethics as you go along. Does that take care of your question? I think we can begin wrapping this up if no one has anything else to say. I am done from my side. So, maybe one last work. I will put this up on the chat box and sign off for now. You can always reach out to me on the discussion forum or, just email. Um, yeah, I hope you're not finding this course um, difficult or boring or either. It's quite insightful and it's very existential at the same time to think about these two things together. And I hope that's what you're taking away from this. So if you have unanswered questions, that is very much expected. So don't panic. Right. So I'm just going to put that up and just sign off. Thank you.